back out in the garage. Finally time to tear this baby down. First thing we're going to do is I've got the oil draining, the filters off. I'm going to take off some of the external parts. Here's the air conditioner bracket. Has one bolt right there. The rest of it was the through bolts for the compressor that hold it to the engine. We'll take that bolt off and get it out of there. Take off these little covers. I have like a 10mm bolt, one on this side, one on the other for those covers. We'll pull the crank sensor, another 10mm bolt. Pull the cam sensor and the oil pressure sensor. It takes a special little socket, so we'll pull that out. Side, I'll go ahead and probably get the oil temp sensor off there in this little cover. That way I don't end up breaking the sensor. And then we'll probably move to the valve train. What I want to do is get it completely torn down today, make a list of all the parts I need. Because so far the only thing I bought for it is a gasket set and some head bolts. Also got a couple of things for the power steering. Remember, I had to cut the pulley off. This is a C6 genuine GM made in China pulley. And there's one of the hoses I need, waiting on some of the other parts to come in. They've been lost in the mail as usual. Well, I got all the external parts off. This is the little coolant, or the oil temperature sensor. The oil circulates through two holes here. Let me show you on the block. Comes out one hole, goes through that cavity, goes back in the other. And that's a good place to put the sensor. But you can also, this is also used to add an auxiliary cooler if you want. So you can take the oil coming out, run it up to a cooler, and then run it back through the other hole. If you get to the point that you can't keep your oil cool. There's the air conditioner tensioner. That long one is the cam position sensor. There's those two brackets. Crank position sensor. Also pulled the coolant temperature sensor out of the side of the head. And there is the oil pressure sensor. All right, I'm ready to take the rocker arms off. I'll go through and break them all loose. And probably go through with the small impact. And take them the rest of the way out. Watch the ones that are actually holding a valve open. I'll take this off as a unit, set it on the bench. Now I'll pull all the push rods out, keep them in their proper order. Okay, I'd already pulled the other side off, so we've got everything lined up here. Mark passenger side, driver's side. Now the push rods are with their rockers. There's not much I need to do with this setup because they've already got Texas Speed push rods. I went in and had already done the trunnion upgrades when I first got the car. So basically all this can be just wiped down, inspected, and put right back in. Next up, I'm going to take off the balancer pulley. It's a really tight fit on there. The bolt is really torqued down. So we need to undo the bolt, then we'll get a puller out, pull the pulley off. You've got to have some way of holding the crank as you undo the bolt. And they make some deals you can bolt on the back that engage the flywheel. We don't have a flywheel on there now. What I'm going to do, all the valves are closed. So I'm putting my thumb over the spark plug hole. Okay, we're building compression, so that piston is coming up as we're turning the thing counterclockwise to take it off. So what I'm going to do is take a piece of clean rope and I'm going to feed it into the spark plug hole. And what this will do is it will jam the piston, or jam the rope in between the piston and the cylinder head, and effectively lock the engine up. Now, if you're doing this with the rocker arms on, you need to make sure that you're on the compression stroke instead of like the exhaust stroke as it's coming up, because you want the valves to be shut for certain. Otherwise, you could end up bending the valve. But since both valves are for sure shut, since the rocker arm's off, we'll just feed the rope in there. Go ahead and turn this. And it's compressed that rope and it is locked up. This is a factory bolt. I like using the factory bolts. They're cheap. They do have to be replaced after you use them because they're torque to yield, but they have sealant on the bottom side of this flange. And that keeps them from leaking and also locks it in place. So what I need to do right now is heat that up with a torch. Otherwise, you'll have a really hard time getting it undone. It doesn't have to be incredibly hot. It's not like you need to drag out the oxyacetylene torch. Right now I'm just watching the moisture on the cast iron pulley. Now I'm finally cooking the moisture off the pulley. So let's see if it'll come loose. There we go. Well, see, I could have went hotter on that because but that was enough. And see the red there, that's the sealant. That locks onto that, and if you don't heat that up, it can be a major pain to get out of there. But this is throw away, well, don't throw it away, recycle it. It's metal, but you cannot reuse this because it is torque to yield. So there we've got the 3-jaw puller on there. Fasten the teeth on the flats in between the spokes. You do not want to try to pull from the outside since that is a rubber, outer ring is rubber mounted to the inner. You'll end up pulling the outside off. I used an aluminum spacer so the pusher bar on the puller is not riding right on the crank. You don't want to damage the crank. Now get everything centered up and now we can pull it off there. Your rope is still in the hole. You just turn the engine around the other way because we're turning the puller the opposite direction, but still need the engine locked up. And it's moving. Like I said, these are on there tight. Considering the factory, they don't use a pin of any kind. And there we go. The pulley is off. Now this particular pulley is a Dayco Power Bond pulley that I put on shortly after I got the car. So unless when I clean it up I see anything wrong with it, seal surface looks good. Everything looks like it should be okay. As long as I don't find anything wrong with it, I'll just clean it up, give it a coat of paint, and put it right back on. If your car still has the original pulley, put a new one on. As you've probably heard of the pulleys, the outer ring will walk a little bit and stuff will start moving around. You don't want that. Next up, I think I'll go ahead and pull the front timing cover. You have 2 bolts coming up from the bottom through the oil pan, and then you have the ring of bolts there, and then that cover should come right off. Those bolts are all 10 millimeter, all the same length. Just had to unstick the gasket from the bottom of the cover a little bit. That had some silicone on it because I've had this cover off before putting the cam in, but didn't change the pan gasket because it didn't take the pan off. So cover's off, set it together with its bolts, timing cover gasket. And before I pull this head, I'm going to, this is on the passenger side, going to pull that plug right there and drain any coolant that's left in the block and get that to where I don't make a mess pulling the head off. It's an 8 millimeter hex. We'll go in there and pop it loose. Have a bucket ready. Go ahead and leave that plug out. That'll be a good place to blast out the cooling passages at the car wash later when I'm cleaning the block. And now that I got the coolant drain, I'm going to go ahead and pull this passenger side head. I'm going to break all these small 10mm bolts loose along the top. Now we'll take care of the big ones. Work your way around in a circle, taking them loose. Now we're just going to take them all out. Alright, all the head bolts are out. Keep in mind, if you're using the stock style torque to yield head bolts, these are all junk. They need to go in the recycle bin. Do not reuse them. Now we're ready to lift off this head. Since we drained the coolant, not a whole lot dumped out. And we'll set this over with the rockers. Slightly used head gasket. All the cylinder bores look good, just like ding in that piston where I had that valve problem the other day. You can still see some of the cross hatching in them. We'll hit them with a hone before we put it back together. I'm curious to see what the pistons themselves look like once I get them out of the bores. Right now we're going to take the lifter trays and the lifters out. 10mm bolt on the tray. That comes out. 4, I'll set it with its appropriate head. Pull the lifters and put them back in the trays. And once again, everything's organized with the side it came off, so stuff can go back in right where it came out. Now I'll take off the other side, same deal on it. The only difference on this side is the coolant drain plug is toward the front of the engine, and it's that bigger plug there. I'll probably go ahead and pull it and get as much coolant out of the jackets there as I can before I pull the head off. And that coolant plug on the driver's side of the block is a H17, so it's a hex 17mm. I had one for something. I don't think it was for this, but hey, at least I had one. All right, second head's off. Everything's lined up just like before. Cylinders all look good. So I think right now I'll lift this up the hoist, take the engine stand off for a second, and take the rear cover off. Okay, this rear cover is similar to the front. It's got 2 bolts going through the bottom. These are really long this time, and then a ring of bolts going on the top. Same as before, all 10mm. And your cover is off. Now while I'm back here, I'm going to go ahead and pull out the piece called the barbell. This piece pokes into that hole on the back. Looks like a little barbell. Has no ring on the one end and just a rib piece on the other. And that blocks an oil passage up inside there. So it is very important that this be in the engine. Because if it's not in the engine, you're going to have oil coming out here where you don't want it. And it will not flow properly internally. So always get a new one of these. They make some that are made out of aluminum. I just always use a new factory plastic one. I've never had any problems with them, but always make sure that goes in there before you put your back cover on. So I'm going to set this with the back cover. That's why I went ahead and took it out now. No chance of me forgetting it. Well, less chance of me forgetting it. The engine's back on the stand now, so I'm going to go ahead and pull the oil pump. You need to undo the screw here that holds the pickup tube to the oil pump, and then 4 bolts holding the pump to the block, and then we should be able to work that out of there. Turn it a little bit, that'll disengage your pickup tube, and then just slide the pump right off. Next up, we need to pull the 3 timing gear bolts. So now that we've got that unbolted, we can pull that off the cam and drop it down, and that lets us get the chain off. Now we need to take off these 4 Torx bit. I know these aren't the same on all of them because some of them have these are flathead screws, some of them have regular screws, but these are a T40 on this. And this is your cam retainer plate that has a seal on there. This will get replaced because of the seal. And I got called in to help one time because those flathead screws with the taper would not come loose. They had stripped out the heads of them. And what I ended up doing was taking a chisel and busting these ears. And then you could get the screw out. But this was hard enough metal that a couple of whacks with the chisel would crack that, and that would take the load off that taper, and then you can get them out. So, little trick there if you ever run into that problem. My cam slid back, so put it back in its spot. Now I'm going to buzz a couple of these bolts back on in this cam gear to give me a bit of a handle pulling this cam out, because you want to be careful with it, not bang it on everything in there. Well, this is an aftermarket cam, and I do intend to reuse it. Probably put some new bearings in, but cam is there to stay. So gently start bringing it out. Use the gear to help support it and guide it through the bearing journals. Now I will knock a set of new bearings in there, but unless I find something much better than this cam will go back in. All right, there's the cam out. Next up, I'm going to pull the little chain guide off. 2 13mm bolts. Not all LS's had this. This is an 04 model. So it did have it, but this piece is designed to keep the chain from kind of wrapping around the gears when you're going really, really fast. And it's good to have on there. Now the earlier model blocks did not have the holes there to screw it in, but I believe there is a template where you can drill and tap and make your own holes. I also think there is an assembly that comes down off the bolts on the cam gear that holds this. But either way, it's not a bad idea to have one of these in. Apparently GM thought it was important enough to add it. Now we're on to the oil pan, and normally I would just flip the engine over, undo everything, and pull the pan off, but since I did not get this drained when it was hot, didn't get the oil drained out, and it was really cold in here, it was slow to drain, and since the plug's on the front, the engine's kind of tilted back, there'll be a lot of oil left in there. So what I'm going to do is just unbolt it upright like this, and then lower the pan down to where the oil stays in the pan. Just a bunch of bolts around the perimeter, holding the pan to the block. This, of course, is a factory batwing pan, which I do intend to keep. I've got the gasket already, and it's the newer style two-piece pans. Now, I've got the gasket to hook the two pieces together, so during the rebuild process, we'll fix up the pan. I know a lot of guys go to the LS6 pan, but in my opinion, this has better oil control, got more oil capacity, and while a lot of the guys need this space right here where the batwing is for intercooler piping or whatever they're running, I'm not doing any of that, so I'm keeping the batwing. So let's get that dropped off and see what we got. Well, that was definitely the way to do that because it wasn't at all hard to get it off there, and there's still quite a bit of oil down there in the pan. Said just bolts around the side. There is one here that is in that little gap, but there is a hole that goes all the way through the pan so you can come up through the bottom with a socket. So even it's easy to get to. So as we're working on the engine, we'll pull this batwing apart and get a good look at it, put the new gasket in between the halves, and get it all cleaned up. Right, I'm going to pull while I'm looking at it, pull the pins out of the head here. They're a split style pin, so just squeeze the gap shut gently with a pair of pliers and they will come right out. I'm going to go ahead and take the lift plate off. All right, I flipped it over, and since I had drained the coolant out of the block through those deals, there wasn't much come out of it, so it didn't make too much of a mess. So right now we need to take the nuts off here to get this windage tray out, and the one here will take off the oil intake. There's nothing down in there on the screen, no chunks, so everything's in good shape. Not that I expected it to be otherwise. But it's good to know. Take this one off to get the oil pickup out of the way. And set all these nuts and bolts down with the pan. And we are into the bottom end. I'm going to put the factory crank bolt back in just so we got a handle to turn everything around easy. The rod bolts are an 11 millimeter. And I'm going to go through and go ahead and break all of them loose. Take number one out and see what it looks like. Right, there is number one out. It's got a little debris on the top. Coating's a little worn on the sides, but actually looks really good. Rings are all free, not all coked up with crap. Now see, that was one of the things that I was concerned with. Is I've had engines where they were running fine, but then the rings would get stuck. Then you'd scorch a section down the edge of the piston and you were done. That was one of the main things on this engine. Bearings and rings. And I will probably go ahead and put a new set of pistons in since these do have 200,000 miles on them. I'll mark this one as number one and pull the rest. Oh, that is another thing. See that? That is a press-in piston pin. And I was not sure if these were going to have press-in or clips. They changed somewhere along the line, and when you look up pistons for this, it can show it either way. That's why I hadn't ordered any pistons yet. But these are the press-in style, the older style. So that's good to know. Well, you can see there, these are the cracked style connecting rods. So this is actually one piece originally, and it is broken apart to where the grain fits just perfect. Keeps them from moving around. And the way they're shaped, you'd have to really not be paying attention to put it on backwards, because nothing fits together. Take a look at the bearings. They are steel back bearings. They're not worn through the upper coating. So they're in pretty good shape too. If everything else looks like this piston, like everybody said, this motor could have went a lot longer before rebuild, but you just don't know until you tear it apart, and so I didn't mind tearing it apart. All right, the piston and rod assemblies all look good. We are ready to take out the crank. There are perimeter bolts going into each main cap on both sides. We'll take those out, and then I'll start working my way around in a circle, taking all the caps off. The caps are numbered, and they of course have to go back in the right spots. 1, 2, 3, 4, and then 5 is numbered on the other side. 5 is the only one where this kick out faces forward. The rest of them have the small kick out. They all face back. Now, it should be easy to figure out how everything goes back together. So let's unbolt it, get the caps out, and then we can get the crank out. Once again, bearing looks good. Middle one's your thrust bearing, so it is a little bit more difficult to get out of there because of the thrust surfaces. Like the rest of them, it looks good. Crank looks good. Doesn't look like there's any issues with the upper bearings. Now look at that, everything in there for 200,000 miles. It's very clean and in great shape. If you saw me tapping the pistons out, it wasn't because there was a ring ridge on any of them, just a little bit of carbon around the top of the cylinders. They all look great. Everything looks just perfect. And since it is an aluminum block, it's nice and light. All right, that's all for this one. She's all torn down. Just need to get some parts, get everything cleaned. We can get her back together. While I'm waiting on parts, we'll go out and start working on the rest of the car. Till next time, thanks for watching.